Shedeur Sanders did everything he could in his brief window of opportunity. He showed poise, accuracy, athleticism, and the kind of playmaking touches that made him a must-watch in college. But the NFL is a grind of timing and opportunity, and an oblique strain at this point in camp is one of those small, cruel things that can rearrange a rookie's trajectory overnight. With Joe Flacco already named the Week 1 starter, the immediate path to early playing time for Sanders just narrowed significantly, and that matters for several reasons. First, context matters. The Browns brought in Flacco as a veteran stopgap with a long track record and in relatively minimal developmental risk. They also spent a third-round pick on Dillon Gabriel and traded for Kenny Pickett. That's a lot of organizational resources devoted to quarterbacks ahead of Sanders. Draft capital and roster transactions aren't just about investment. They shape the pecking order because coaches build around players they've acquired intentionally. Sanders, as a fifth-round pick, entered camp with the lowest outward investment of the four quarterbacks. That doesn't mean he can't win the job, but it does mean he has to overcome structural inertia. Second, the timing of the injury compounds the problem. Preseason opportunities are finite. Sanders' debut against Carolina, 14 for 23, 2 TDs, 0 turnovers, was eye-opening, and it generated real momentum. Social buzz, strong TV ratings, a Nike ad, and a spike in public credibility. But the preseason and joint practices that follow are when coaches evaluate consistency, decision-making under varied game scripts, and how a rookie handles corrections from the staff. Missing one of the next 2 games and any practice reps in between costs Sanders reps that opponents and evaluators will use to compare him to Pickett and Gabriel. Those are direct, measurable opportunities. An oblique strain, even a short-term one, eats into the very evidence he needs to convert hype into a roster trajectory. Third, there's the roster math and practical decisions. Teams rarely carry 4 quarterbacks, though the Browns might because of the unusual collection they have. Even if they keep 4, the order matters for who gets extended reps in practice and who's prepared to step in if injuries strike. Sanders' rookie contract is team-friendly and he's cheap relative to the veterans. That gives Cleveland flexibility to keep him as a developmental asset. But it also reduces his leverage. Coaches will balance upside against readiness. If the Browns view Week 1 stability as a priority, with a veteran starter and a clearly defined backup, Sanders may be parked as a reserve unless injury or clear practice performance forces the staff's hand. There's also a psychological and public relations angle. Sanders has a national profile beyond most fifth-round rookies. That attention can be a double-edged sword. It can accelerate expectations and create pressure, but it also keeps the spotlight on him when he does get chances. Coaches know that, and they also know the roster must be constructed to win games, not to satisfy outside noise. If Sanders stays patient, uses veteran mentorship from Flacco, cleans up any mechanical or processing kinks the staff identifies, and is ready when called upon, that profile can become an asset later in the season, not something to force into a premature Week 1 start. What should Sanders and his camp focus on right now? First, recovery and rehabbing the oblique the right way. Pushing to return too soon invites a lingering issue that destroys timing. Second, mental reps. Study the playbook, digest the film from his strong debut and from the veterans, and be as prepared as possible for every rep he does get. Third, demonstrate leadership and professionalism in meetings and the film room. Those things influence coaches as much as a few flashy throws in a preseason game. Finally, given his draft status and the crowded room, special teams consciousness and readiness to contribute in non-quarterback ways, even limited, can make the difference when rosters are pared down. Looking at realistic scenarios, the most likely outcomes in the short term are: Sanders stays with the Browns as a developmental QB on the active roster or practice squad. Flacco starts Week 1 with Pickett and Gabriel ahead of Sanders in the emergency pecking order, and Sanders' path to meaningful snaps in the regular season will depend on injuries, Flacco's performance, or an exceptionally impressive finish to the preseason if he's healthy in time. A less likely but still possible runway is that an injury or poor camp showing by one of the other quarterbacks opens a door for Sanders mid-season. And once he's in live regular season action, his combination of accuracy and mobility could win him more consistent chances. Bottom line, this isn't the end of the line for Shedeur Sanders. It is, however, a real setback. The margin for error is small for late-round rookies, and those margins are measured in practice reps and preseason snaps. Sanders' debut proved he belongs in the conversation. The oblique strain has simply made the climb steeper. How he handles rehab, preparation, and the weight will determine whether this moment becomes a temporary hiccup or the start of a steadier long-term rise. Joe Flacco being named the Browns' Week 1 starter closes one chapter of this offseason's most publicized quarterback story, and it reshuffles everything for Shedeur Sanders. That outcome was predictable in one sense. Flacco is the veteran with the most NFL-ready profile. The team invested in him to steady the room, and coaches often default to experience when the margin for error is small. But for Sanders, the timing couldn't be worse. He arrived in Cleveland with enormous attention after a turbulent draft slide, flashed real promise in a publicly viewed preseason debut, then lost momentum to an oblique strain that cost him the follow-up reps scouts and coaches rely on to make confident evaluations. So what does this mean practically? First, depth chart reality. Sanders started camp as the least invested signal caller of the four, late fifth-round pick behind a veteran like Flacco, a seasoned mid-career addition in Kenny Pickett, and a third-round rookie in Dillon Gabriel. Teams weigh draft capital and experience heavily. Those are levers that already push the needle against an immediate starting role. Flacco's Week 1 designation simply formalizes what the Browns' roster building suggested from the start. Second, opportunity is now about development, not immediate elevation. Sanders' preseason tape and the enormous TV ratings he drew gave him a platform, a marketable moment that won't be erased, but coaches measure consistency, playbook mastery, and repeatable practice habits. His immediate priority has to be full recovery, then maximizing behind-the-scenes growth, mastering cadence and protections in Stefanski's offense, building chemistry with the receiving core in walkthroughs, and converting every scout team rep into a learning moment. Sitting behind Flacco isn't career death. It's a controlled environment to refine footwork, progressions, and NFL timing if Sanders approaches it like a professional apprenticeship. Third, perception matters, but it isn't destiny. The draft slide created a narrative that followed him into Cleveland, which can be a double-edged sword. Media heat, endorsement interest, and fan expectations raise profile and scrutiny simultaneously. Sanders needs to neutralize the noise by letting on-field practice and preseason snaps, when healthy, do the talking. The Browns' decision-makers will respond to tape and readiness more than hype. Finally, roster mechanics and future paths. Cleveland could keep 3 QBs and occasionally 4, depending on injury risk and special teams considerations. If Sanders stays healthy and continues to show growth, he can climb the depth chart as a short-term backup or develop into a mid-season option if injuries or performance force the issue. If progress stalls, the Browns might prioritize the higher-drafted Gabriel or the veteran value of Pickett, which would make Sanders' practice squad accessibility or an outside market claim the realistic fallback. Bottom line, Flacco starting is a setback for Sanders' Week 1 ambitions, but not a terminal one. Recovery, daily work, and football IQ gains are his currency now. If he treats this as an extended audition, learn from Flacco, absorb Stefanski's system, stay available, the preseason headline will morph from missed opportunity to patient development long before anyone writes his long-term story.